I did do a bulb planting. We did go out to Ann Arbor, did a bulb planting in the clay soil, and the basics for that were dig up the area, throw the chunks of clay into a far off pile that's out of the way, and then refill it with I think it was like 2/3 topsoil, 1/3 peat that were all mixed together. I pre-mixed this soil, put it in 5-gallon buckets. So we half filled the holes. Then we planted the bulbs. The bigger ones go deeper, the medium ones go medium, and then the smaller ones were like right at the top. And then, we pre-filled with the dirt about halfway. Then we mixed it with the bone meal. So that soil was mixed with bone meal first. Then we put in the bulbs, and then we put in more soil on top. We mounded it up like a hill look, and watered it in well, and mulched it. And they should very happily grow on their own. They don't need to be watered. Once you water them in the first time, you don't need to keep continuing to water. They will take care of themselves. They will get they'll get water from the rain, they'll get water from the snows, and in the spring even, when they start coming up, the ground will be so wet from the snowfall and from being springtime that they're not going to need additional water. So that's kind of fun. And I put in crocuses, daffodils, allium, metallic, Dutch iris, and tulips, like multicolored tulips. So should be a lot of color. The client, she said she had paid for spring bulbs and the first job when we put the perennial garden in, and when I asked her, well, what kind does she want? And she said she wants color. So I was like, okay, cool. And what I do is, whenever I do a bulb planting, I always try to make sure there are bulbs that will bloom early spring, like crocuses. Yeah. Early spring are when the crocuses will come up. And I usually put crocuses near, because they're really small. They're only, maybe 3 inches tall, 6 inches tall. They have bright colors though. And crocuses are really nice to put near places where people walk all the time so they can see them. Because it's like a hope thing, I think. Like the winter's almost over, the crocuses are coming up. Look at this. And it just makes people smile. When you look in the spring, the early spring, you'll see a lot of people taking pictures of crocuses because it's just nice to see. And then bright yellow colors, they pop. So daffodils, I usually put a little bit further back in the designs because those colors are going to pop out because they're so bright. Generally speaking, you want the whites and the like purples, anything of those kinds of shades, like light pink. Those types of things are going to have a little bit more forward. Otherwise, they kind of disappear. The allium is mixed colored allium. It'll be whites and purples. They will grow to 2 to 2.5 feet. And I put them strategically so it'll look like when they come up, and they're late bloomers. So when they come up, it'll be in like 3 particular areas, and it'll almost look like statues in the garden, which is cool. And so we got crocuses first, then the daffodils and tulips are going to bloom, and after that will be the allium and the Dutch iris. So the crocus leaves are going to kind of die back when the tulips and the daffodils are blooming. Now when the tulips and the daffodils are just about done and they're kind of fading back, then the allium and the Dutch iris are going to bloom. So there should be, through the spring, from the early spring to the late spring, there should be a nice selection of color, nice pops of color within the garden. One thing to think about, if you have never done spring bulbs before, I would definitely wait until you have the leaves. The leaves are going to turn from green to brown. You don't do anything with those leaves or the bulbs or anything like that until the leaves turn brown. When the leaves turn brown, you can snip the leaves off at the ground level and just let them sleep until it's time for them to bloom again the next year. Some people, as the leaves are turning brown, will like bend them down, so that's not what you see, and you'll see plants that are around them. Some people will have bulbs planted, and then in front of the bulbs they'll have like a summer blooming plant. So as the bulbs are finishing and they're starting to dry out, the summer blooming plants, maybe daylilies or something else, are coming up. The leaves are coming up, and that's what you see is the greening of the leaves for the summer plants, but you don't see the dieback of the leaves of the bulbs. And they are supposed to do that. All the energy from the leaves, that chlorophyll stuff, that will all go down, and the starches will go down into the bulbs for the next year. The other cool thing with the bulbs is that every year that they're in the ground, as long as it's got some decent soil, they're going to start like multiplying. And you can tell, like, if you planted, maybe you only planted a group of like 3 bulbs, okay? And you see the stems coming up. Maybe they're tulips. You see stems coming up this year. Well, next year you might have 5 growing, but now they're getting closer together. And then the following year, maybe you have 7 growing, and they're getting closer together, and they're going to get like squished up. So sometimes, and you got to kind of monitor it, sometimes you may have to, after the bulbs are done, the leaves are dying or dead, you may have to dig them up and replant them where you want them to be. Some bulbs are really good for naturalizing, like daffodils. Daffodils will spread if they like the conditions. Some bulbs, like grape hyacinth, those are really little, and they make like it's like a little purple flower at the top. They're just really tiny, and they have really thin leaves, like onion leaves, I'd say, but they're really thin. No, like chive leaves, and they have a little thing at the top, grape hyacinth, and they spread too. They can spread really well. It could be a good ground cover if you want it to be. They also transplant well. So if they're spreading out where you don't want them, you can gently lift them, wait till they're done or close to being done, lift them and move them to a different place, water them in, and let them go. And then they're going to come up in that new place, which is kind of nice. So then you have free bulbs. So that first year, when you make an investment in any kind of bulb plants, any spring flowering plants like that, most of them are going to reproduce, and you're going to get more the following year, and you're going to get more the following year, and you're going to get more the following year. So if the cost of bulbs seems high initially, just keep in mind that the longer you're there, the more bulbs you're going to have, the higher the performance you're going to see. The exception would be if you have that big old group I was talking about. If they're all like clustered together, and down below in the soil, they are all fighting for nutrients, they're not going to be as happy. Or the blooms on top might not be as large as they could be, or the buds might not develop like they should, or the leaves will start getting brown or yellow prematurely. So that's too much crowding. Think of it like if you ride in a subway or something and people are on top of each other. That's what the bulbs get like at some point. So one thing that beginners do a lot of with bulbs is plant them too close together. They don't leave enough space when they plant them. Maybe they make one hole and they throw 2 or 3 bulbs in there, or they use like those augers on a drill, which would be nice if you're doing like one bulb at a time. And if you have the spacing of like 4 to 6 inches or whatever for each one, that would be fine. But if not, you're going to crowd them, and they're going to need to be divided more often. Like instead of every couple years, it might be every year, and that could be a pain. And typically, when you plant bulbs, you're going to plant them in odd numbers. So you may have 3, You may have 5, you may have 7. And what I like to do is I either make a large circle, like the size of a 5-gallon bucket round. I think it's about a foot wide all the way around. A large circle and maybe about a foot of soil out. And then I like to take like a handful of what I'm going to plant, kind of not throw them, don't throw them because you'll wreck the bulbs, but kind of gently toss them in and kind of let them, see where they, let them scatter and plant them wherever they scattered. And when you plant bulbs, the tips go up. So if you look at a bulb before you plant it, make sure you look at it. It kind of looks like a Hershey Kiss. It's got a pointy end and it should have a flatter end. It's got a pointy end. It may have a little bit of a leaf coming up or a stem from the pointy end. It's got a flat end. The flat end might have dried roots. The tip always goes up when you plant. So if you scatter them in the hole and you're just going to plant them naturally, make sure that the flat part is down at the ground and you press it against the soil down below before you go ahead and replace the dirt. Because sometimes beginners will plant them and they don't understand about putting the tip up, and their tulips will like grow sideways. If they dig them out, they'll be like, whoa, there they were. Or sometimes they'll actually grow, like if the tip is down, they'll grow like down and then they'll come back up again. Or they may not come up at all. So if you want the best results, these are some things to keep in mind. You also, when you plant, you can mix in bone meal. The package will tell you how much to put in for how much soil. Bone meal with the soil. Then put the plants in, the bulbs in. And don't fertilize at that time. The bone meal is enough to enrich the bulbs so that they can start to make root systems down below. And yeah, that's what I'm going to say about that. In the spring, when you start seeing the leaves coming up from the tulips or the leaves coming up from the daffodils, that's a good time to give it some bulb food, some fertilizer. They call it bulb food. And I believe that kind of food, you just take like the measuring cup and you kind of sprinkle it around the outsides of the plant. So if this is the plant in the ground, here's the ground level, then you're sprinkling like down here, just down here. And any kind of fertilizer, don't let it get on the leaves or on the flowers or the stems because it can burn it, but sprinkle it on the around the plant. You might water it in, or you might just let the rain happen. Read the directions on that, but do not fertilize bulbs, spring bulbs, at planting time. You don't want them growing right now and then suddenly there's an ice storm or a snowstorm and all the stuff that grew will die. That's sad. You want them kind of sleeping and dormant until the spring. And then you need to cover those holes. Mulch works really well. Wood chips work well. Straw, leaf piles, grass clippings maybe, but anything that's really fine like grass clippings, or like if you mulch up your leaves with the grass, I wouldn't make it really thick if that's the case. Straw, you could make a thick layer, but I wouldn't make grass clippings and cut up leaves in a thick layer, because then the air and the water can't get into the ground where it belongs. But the point of mulching it, one, is to maintain a steady temperature so that it may take longer for the ground to freeze. But then also, if we've got really warm days again, it's not going to thaw really fast and then freeze and thaw and like that. It's going to keep a steady temperature. Two, it's going to keep the squirrels and chipmunks from smelling fresh dirt and from smelling the smell of you, the human. Chipmunks don't like the smell of humans, and that is why they will eat the plants that you've touched with your hands or the soil that you've worked with your hands. They don't like that. And squirrels they love bulbs. They love bulbs. There's a couple other tips I have for keeping the squirrels away, but I'm not going to talk about those right now. So we went out to Ann Arbor and we did the bulb planting, and that was fun. And I'm really looking forward to see how it turns out. And it was nice to go back to that garden and see how it was doing. And those are all first year perennials and first year annuals. So the annuals really, they took the spotlight mostly for that garden. And then we can put in different annuals next year. I'm gonna kind of take the client's pulse and see what kinds of annuals they might want next year. And so also for next year's garden for them, I'll be recommending that they mulch with compost instead of wood chips or anything else, and mostly around in where the plants actually are. They'd be mulching with compost, so maybe 2-3 inches of compost. That compost is going to gradually work down into the soil as the critters come up from the soil, and eventually over a couple years that clay soil will work really well. And the more plants that are planted in clay soil, the better off the clay gets, the better the soil gets, and the less compacted it can be. Anyway, that's about it. Just figured I'd check in with my peeps. And